Hi, this is Abby Main, and this is my second ornithology exam. All right, so to first talk about seed predators versus seed dispersers. So a seed predator, these birds are going to eat seeds fully, like chew them up and everything, which does not allow them to be dispersed to create new trees. Um, an example of that would be the northern cardinal. And then there's seed dispersers, which these birds are usually going to eat fruits and then just end up swallowing seeds, and the seeds go through their digestive system, end up in their scat, and that'll bring them to a brand new place. An example would be a blue jay. Oh, or they might just carry them to a new place. Not just that example. Um, all right, so some ecological benefits of seed dispersers. So plants dropping seeds right under them from where they are, those are going to have trouble growing. Although, like wind and then other forms of erosion can help, for the most part, they're just going to sit right there. Um, they're going to have trouble competing for sunlight and the other things being dropped right there. So seed dispersers are going to carry them away from the competing trees and allow them to actually germinate and grow, get proper sunlight, and all that. That brings new trees to different locations as well, and also can be beneficial for forest regrowth after a fire, for example. Um, so this lecture, by the way, this was actually probably one of my favorite guest lectures that you've given. Um, they used a two-island comparison. So they used Saipan and Guam, not only because they're close to each other, but they have very similar habitats. And unlike Guam, Saipan did not get the brown tree snake from the ships from uh, the post-World War II life. So Saipan was not affected by the brown tree snake. Guam was. So they used the two islands as a good comparison to see how Guam was healing. Um, so overall on the brown tree snake, so it's native to Southeast Asia, hence why after Japan surrendered and they're bringing the military equipment over, that the brown tree snake ended up on the island of Guam. So in their native habitat, they have predators like larger mammals and birds of prey that kind of keep their population in check. Um, they'll mostly feed on small mammals and then small reptiles such as lizards while they're there. Whereas on Guam, they didn't have any natural predators, which obviously um, made it so their population could get out of control. And since there weren't those smaller mammals and small reptiles, they mainly feeded on birds and then bird eggs, which really hurt their populations. That got rid of many birds, including a lot of the important seed dispersers. So therefore, a lot of invasive plants were able to come into Guam. Um, as far as reintroducing birds to the island, he had several options, and they basically tried to um, figure out what the best bird to reintroduce for the island was. So first thing, obviously, the bird should have been there and thriving before the arrival of the brown tree snake. They have to be native to the island. The second thing I remember is the bird should be a seed disperser. Not A lot of the birds they looked up were seed predators, to where they wouldn't actually be aiding in forest regeneration. So they needed a seed disperser to bring the forest back. And the bird should have somewhat of a defense against the brown tree snake, and it should kind of prefer habitat that they would be specifically wanting to put it into. Um, Next, moving on, and this paper was a nice little throwback to my time in applied wildlife habitat management, because I had never heard of the red cockaded woodpecker until I went to the lab portion of that class. I was kind of embarrassed because most of my classmates knew about the red cockaded woodpecker, and then I realized that it's mostly in the southeastern U.S., which I was one of the few non-southeastern U.S. people there, so that made me feel a little bit better. And I actually thought everybody was saying red cock-headed woodpecker. So like I said, native to the southeastern U.S., habitat is usually longleaf pine stands, which aren't really common in Southwest Ohio, hence why I had never heard of them. And they use the cavities of the pine trees for nesting and then also roosting. Um, they lost a lot of their habitat due to the logging practices, and they were listed as endangered in 1970, like pretty much right when the Endangered Species Act. Um, so for some demographic management, uh, first they did the artificial cavities. I got to see a few of these when I was in Yamasi for applied wildlife habitat management. So their cavities created in the trees, and they give the birds habitat if there are not many cavities available. They preferred the ones with drilled starts to them in the end. Then there's the cavity restrictor plates. I don't remember seeing these, but I'm sure I did. But since other species will try and use those cavities, such as a flying squirrel or a like different types of woodpeckers, they'll put these metal plates on around the cavity to try and keep those other species out. So this successfully kept the pileated woodpecker from destroying them. As far as the flying squirrel management, since flying squirrels could get around the cavity restrictor plates, they would either trap and remove them, or they would use some olfactory means, so something nasty that the flying squirrels don't like to smell, to deter them from that area. Um, the effectiveness the effectiveness of this was pretty debated. Some studies said it helped, some studies said that it didn't. Then the last was translocation. So in areas with healthy populations of the red cockaded woodpecker, they would remove some and bring them into areas with low populations to rebound them. And they saw a lot of success with it. Then there's the habitat management. Prescribed fire, once again, I had never seen a prescribed fire until I went on that applied wildlife habitat management trip. But that was really cool for me to see. I had just heard of them. So red cockaded woodpeckers prefer the very open pine stands. So prescribed fires are important as they kind of clear the undergrowth in the forest area to make it a little bit more open, and you don't get all these trees that are trying to compete with the pine trees. What they came up with was that dormant season fires were much more effective than the growing season ones. Then there's recruitment clusters where they're planting a bunch of pine trees themselves in areas where the pine trees aren't located, and that also came to improving the population. Then you get hurricane preparedness because we are in southeastern United States. They all have to be worried about hurricanes. I do not in Southwest Ohio. But they would prepare for hurricanes with prescribed burns and also put in cavities immediately after to reduce the hurricane impact on the rock-cockaded woodpecker populations. Wow. All right. And as for the discussion, overall, they said that a one-size-fits-all approach does not work with their management. You've got to be dependent on the amount of kleptoparasites like the pileated woodpecker or the flying squirrels present, the chances that there's going to be hurricane damage, the amount of natural cavities that you see, etc. So like I said, one size all approach does not work. It's very important to continue in my opinion, it's very important to continue monitoring their population if they are downlisted and continue these practices. Thank you and have a wonderful evening.